radiator in my car clicked 3 times before it went quiet, and I sat in the parking lot of a Shell station in the dark, eating a granola bar I'd had in my purse since Tuesday, thinking, I'm 31 years old, and I have $2.3 million in a brokerage account, and I cannot go home. Not because I had nowhere to go. I had plenty of places to go, I just couldn't make myself leave yet. I needed to sit in the quiet for a minute first. My name is Serena. I'm the oldest of 2 girls. My younger sister is Jess, 7 years younger, which means she was born the year I started 2nd grade and the year my mother decided, without saying it out loud, that she'd finally gotten the daughter she actually wanted. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true, and because it took me until I was about 26 to stop pretending it wasn't. Growing up, Jess got the ballet lessons and I got the library card. Jess got the new clothes, and I got the ones from the consignment store on Route 9 that smelled like other people's fabric softener. Jess cried, and my mother held her. I cried, and my mother told me I was too sensitive. My father was different. My father was just absent. Not in a dramatic way, not drugs or gambling or another family somewhere, just absent the way some men are. He came home, he watched TV, he ate what was put in front of him, he went to sleep. He had no opinions about anything that happened in that house unless my mother formed them for him first. The one time I tried to talk to him, I was 16, I'd gotten a 1510 on my SAT and I wanted to apply to Georgetown. He looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "That's expensive." Then he went back to his newspaper. I applied anyway. I got in. I took out every loan they offered me, and I worked 20 hours a week at a campus coffee shop, and I didn't ask my parents for a single dollar. They didn't offer one. I graduated with honors, got a job at a consulting firm in DC, and started paying off my loans the month I started working. While I was doing that, I was also teaching myself to invest. Nothing fancy at first. Index funds, employer 401k match, reading everything I could find on nights and weekends. Then I got better. I got a lot better. By 28, I had a side portfolio that was making more than my salary. By 30, I had quietly left the consulting firm and was managing my own money full-time out of a home office. My parents didn't know any of this. That wasn't an accident. I learned early that information given to my mother was information she would use, reshape, and hand to Jess. If I told her I got a raise, Jess needed help with rent. If I told her I bought a car, the car my mother drove was suddenly making a funny noise. I stopped volunteering things. I started answering questions with questions. I drove the same 2014 Civic I'd had since graduate school, because it was paid off and reliable, and because nobody looked at a 2014 Civic and thought she was doing fine. I came home maybe 4 or 5 times a year. Holidays, a birthday here and there. I stayed in my old room, which still had the same comforter from high school, the same desk lamp with the wobbly base, the same view of the neighbor's aluminum fence. It was never comfortable, but it was mine. I'd grown up in that room. I'd cried in that room and studied in that room and planned my whole escape from that room. That should have meant something, even to them. It didn't. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in October. My mother. I almost didn't pick up. "Jess is moving back," she said, before I'd even said hello. "Okay," I said. "She and Brandon are having some issues." A pause. "She needs a space of her own right now, to heal." I knew it was coming and I waited for her to say it. "We thought you could take the pullout in the den. Just temporarily, until she gets on her feet." I want to be clear about something. I was not living there at the time. I was paying rent on an apartment 40 minutes away. I came home for weekends sometimes, maybe once a month, kept some clothes there, a toiletry bag. My room was still my room in the sense that it had always been called that, and nobody else had ever slept in it. "You want to give Jess my room," I said. "It's not your room, Serena. It's our house. I've had that room since I was 4 years old. And now Jess needs it. You're barely here anyway." There it was. Because I had been responsible. Because I had built a life. Because I was not the one who needed rescuing this particular season. My room was forfeit. Jess, who was 24, who had married a man named Brandon 6 months ago in a ceremony that cost my parents $40,000, who had lived in 3 apartments in 2 years with my parents co-signing every lease. Jess needed the room. I said I would think about it. My mother said, "We already ordered a new bed for her." I cleared out my things that weekend. I didn't argue. I carried boxes to my car in 2 trips, and I didn't say anything except, "I'll be out by Sunday." My mother made Jess's favorite for dinner, pasta with the homemade sauce that took all day. She didn't make anything I liked. She didn't ask if I wanted to stay and eat. I drove back to my apartment, ordered Thai food, and sat on my couch thinking about the fact that I had let this go on for 31 years. Not anymore. I want to explain something because I've thought about it a lot since then, and I know how it sounds. I know the most obvious question is, why did you go back at all? Why did you keep engaging with people who treated you like an afterthought? The honest answer is that I kept thinking they would change, that there would be a moment when my mother would look at me and see me, not as the inconvenient older daughter, not as a resource to be managed, but as her kid, her firstborn, the one who asked for nothing and gave everything. That moment never came, but I came to understand something sitting in that apartment with my pod dye getting cold. I didn't need that moment anymore. I had everything I needed. They just didn't know it. And that gap between what they assumed about me and what was actually true was about to become the most important thing in my life. 2 weeks after I cleared out my room, my phone rang. It was my father, which almost never happened. My father didn't make calls, he received them. "There's something your mother wants to talk to you about," he said. "Can you come by this weekend?" I went. My mother was at the kitchen table with a folder and a yellow legal pad, and the expression she used when she was about to ask for something she knew she shouldn't be asking for. She sat me down. She offered me coffee, which she never did. I said no. "Your father and I have been talking," she said, "and we want to do something for Jess." "Jess," she explained, "and Brandon, despite the issues, were going to try to work things out. They wanted a fresh start. They'd found a house they loved in a town about 20 minutes away. Nice neighborhood. Good school district, which, she said, was important because Jess was expecting. I absorbed that. We want to co-sign their mortgage," my mother said, "but the bank is being difficult. They need someone with a stronger income profile to be on the application." I looked at her. "We thought you could be the co-signer," she said. "You have good credit, stable income." "You don't know what my income is," I said. "You've been at that firm for years. You're responsible. You've always been responsible. It's actually one of the things—" "I left the firm 2 years ago," I said. A pause. "Well, you must be doing something," she said. "You always land on your feet." I looked at my father. He was looking at the table. "I need to think about it," I said. "Jess really has her heart set on this house," my mother said. "And with the baby?" I said I need to think about it. I drove home. I sat in my car in the parking garage under my building for about 10 minutes. Then I called my accountant, and then I called my attorney, a woman named Sandra, who I had been paying a retainer to for 2 years for exactly this kind of moment. "If you co-sign," Sandra said, "you are legally liable for that mortgage. If they default, it's on your credit, your assets, your name." "I know," I said. "Are you thinking about doing it?" "No," I said. "I'm thinking about what I'm actually going to do instead." Sandra had been my attorney since I set up my first LLC. Over the years, I had moved my assets into a holding company, a clean, boring named thing called Aldervale Capital, LLC. It had a registered agent in Delaware, a separate mailing address, and absolutely no connection to my personal name in any document that was easy to find. I hadn't hidden it for any nefarious reason. I'd set it up on the advice of a financial advisor when I was 27 because it was the smart tax structure for my situation. But it had a second use I was about to appreciate fully. I called my mother the next day and told her I couldn't co-sign. I said I had some debt she didn't know about, student loans, medical bills, nothing dramatic. Just enough to make me a liability rather than an asset. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "I see." The way she said it meant, "You're letting your sister down." What happened next happened fast. Within a week, my mother called to tell me that Jess and Brandon had found a different co-signer, a friend of my father's, someone who'd known the family for years. I said that was great. I asked about the house. She gave me the address without thinking about it. I looked it up. It was a nice house, 1,950 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, built in 2009. It had been on the market for a while. The listing price was $387,000. I ran the comps. I called a real estate contact I had. I made an offer. Cash. Full asking price, no contingencies, close in 3 weeks. The sellers took it in 48 hours. I should explain the part about why they didn't know. The offer was made through Aldervale Capital, LLC. The closing documents listed Aldervale as the buyer. There was no Serena anywhere in the paperwork that Jess or Brandon or my parents would have seen. The sellers knew who they were dealing with. Their realtor knew. The title company knew. My family did not know. And because they did not know, they went to their own closing 3 days after mine, with their paperwork in order and their cosigner and their excitement about the nursery pink colors they'd already picked out. And the sellers signed nothing, because the sellers no longer owned the house. Aldervale did. I got a call from my mother at 6:47 in the evening. She said, "Something went wrong with the house." I said, "What happened?" "Someone bought it. Someone bought it right out from under them. It doesn't make any sense. The sellers, that's terrible," I said. "I'm so sorry. I meant neither of those things." Jess called me 2 days later, crying, asking if I knew any investors who might want to sell a house in that neighborhood, because she was convinced it was someone who was planning to flip it, and maybe they'd sell at a slight markup before they got started. "I can ask around," I said. I adjusted the letter that evening on Aldervale Capital letterhead. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Brandon Lowe, Jess's married name, and it informed them that Aldervale Capital had recently acquired the property at that address and was prepared to offer a 12-month lease arrangement at $2,400 per month, with an option to negotiate a purchase agreement at the end of the lease term. Sandra reviewed it. It was airtight. The rent was fair market, maybe $50 under. The option clause was real. I wasn't trying to punish Jess in some theatrical way. I was doing what I had decided, quietly, a long time ago, that I would always do. Protect myself first, and let other people feel the consequences of their choices. Sandra handled the communication. Jess and Brandon signed. They had no idea. I didn't plan to tell anyone. I genuinely thought I would just let the situation run itself. Collect rent. Be a fair landlord. Keep my name out of it. I was managing 15 other investments. This was just another one. What changed things was my mother. About 6 weeks after Jess and Brandon moved in, my mother called me and said she wanted to have dinner. Just the two of us at the Italian place on Elm Street she'd always liked. I agreed. I thought maybe it was a peace offering of some kind. It was not. We sat down, and after about 15 minutes of small talk about Jess's pregnancy and the baby shower they were already planning, my mother folded her hands on the table and said, "Your father and I are a little tight right now. With the wedding last year, and helping Jess with the deposit." "You helped with the deposit?" "Well, the landlord required first and last month plus security. It was a lot. Anyway." She looked at me steadily. "We were wondering if you could help out. Just for a few months. Nothing too large. $1,000 a month would make such a difference." I put down my fork. "Mom," I said, "do you know who owns the house Jess is living in?" She looked at me. "It's some company. Aldervale something." "Aldervale Capital," I said. "Yes. Why?" "Because I own Aldervale Capital," I said. "Yes. Why?" "Because I own Aldervale Capital," I said. "I'm Jess's landlord." I watched her face go through about 4 different expressions in about 3 seconds. Disbelief first, then calculation, then something close to embarrassment, and this was the one that stayed. A look I had seen before, a look that said, "I'm about to find a way to make this about what I deserve." "You bought that house," she said. "Through my company, yes. You could have just given it to them." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the comforter from high school. I thought about the $40,000 wedding I wasn't asked to be in, just invited to. I thought about the pullout in the den. "No," I said. "I really couldn't have." I want to be honest about what followed, because it wasn't clean or triumphant. It was messy the way family things always are. My mother told my father. My father called me and said, in his flat, uninflected way, "Your mother is very upset." I said, "I know. She feels like you've been hiding things." "I've been protecting my assets," I said. "There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's not going to see it that way. I know that too." Jess called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 6 minutes long and covered, in rough order, her shock, her hurt, her feeling that I had been surveilling her conviction that I had done this deliberately to humiliate her, and finally, and this was the part I had expected, the request. If I really owned the house, couldn't I just let them live there without paying rent? At least until after the baby? She was under so much stress. The lease terms were hard. $2,400 was so much. I texted back, "I'm glad you're settled. I'll make sure the lease terms are fair. Sandra at Hammond and Reed is my contact if you have questions." She didn't respond for 2 weeks. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew until Sandra informed them 3 months later, was that the lease contained something else. A clause that came into effect if any lessee attempted to pursue legal action against the lessor in connection with acquisition of the property. Not aggressive, just protective. Sandra had written it carefully. There was also another clause buried in paragraph 11, which I had added myself, a right of first refusal, meaning if I ever chose to sell the property, I was obligated to offer it to the current tenant first, at a fair market price determined by independent appraisal. This is the part nobody talks about when they hear stories like this. Nobody talks about the part where you also gave them a door. I didn't do it to be magnanimous. I did it because I wanted to be someone who left people with options. I had been left without options my whole childhood. I didn't want to be in the business of doing that to other people, even the ones who had done it to me. About 4 months later, I was doing my morning run near the river trail when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered because Sandra had told me to expect a call from a title company. It wasn't the title company. It was Brandon. He didn't introduce himself. He said, "I want to talk about the house." I stopped running. "Okay, I know this is you," he said. "I mean, obviously, Jess figured it out. We both did." A pause. "I want to say I'm not angry. I think I would have done the same thing." That surprised me. "Jess is angry," he said. "She might be angry for a while, but I've been doing a lot of thinking, and you didn't have to include the right of first refusal. You didn't have to rent at market rate. You could have charged us more, or sold it the same week, or never told anyone." "I'm not trying to hurt her," I said. "I know that now," he said. "I think she'll know it too eventually." We talked for about 8 minutes. He told me the baby was due in 6 weeks. He told me Jess had started a small business out of the house. Something with custom stationery. He sounded proud when he said it, and that the space was good for her. He told me that he was going to make sure they could buy the house at the end of the lease, that he was going to get their finances in order. I believed him. My mother and I didn't talk for almost 5 months. When she finally called, she didn't apologize. My mother doesn't apologize. What she did was call me on a Tuesday morning and talk about a recipe she was trying for Thanksgiving and ask if I would be coming. And when I said I needed to think about it, she said, "I hope you will." That was it. That was the closest she had to offering something. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called her back and said I would come, but I would be leaving after dinner. No overnight. "Fine," she said. "And Mom, I need you to know something. The way things were set up before doesn't work for me anymore. I'm not available to be asked for money. I'm not available to have my things moved without being asked. And I'm not a fallback resource for Jess. I'm her sister. That's what I'm available for." A long silence. "All right," she said. I don't think it was a transformation. I don't think she had some revelation about who I am. But I think she understood, maybe for the first time, that I was not going to fold. I had not been folded. The person she thought she knew, the quiet one, the one who ate consignment store clothes and drove the old car and never made a fuss, was not the whole picture. Had never been the whole picture. I had just been waiting for the right time to show the rest of it. I didn't call him. I didn't explain myself. Sav Prandon are still there, paying rent, on time every month, and their daughter, her name is Wren, which I think is beautiful, was born healthy in January. I met her for the first time at Thanksgiving. She has Jess's eyes and this completely baffling amount of red hair. I held her in the kitchen while Jess was heating something up, and Jess looked at me over her shoulder and said, I'm still working through it. I know, I said. I don't know if I would have done it differently, she said. If I were you, I think maybe I would have done the exact same thing. Probably, I said. She turned back to the stove. The baby made a small noise and went to sleep in my arms. My mother watched from the doorway for a moment, and then she went back to the dining room without saying anything. Some things don't get resolved. They just shift into a shape you can live with. I drove home that night with the window cracked, cold November air coming through, the highway empty in both directions. The same car. Still running fine. I turned up the radio and I thought about nothing in particular for 38 miles. That was enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm sitting in a Shell station parking lot eating a granola bar in the dark. And I have more money in my brokerage account than most people will earn in 20 lifetimes. And I'm the one feeling like I need to justify my existence to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. That moment clarified something I've been circling for years. The people who treat you like a resource don't stop because you ask them to. They stop because the resource becomes something they can't access anymore. Not through bitterness, not through punishment, through the quiet, steady work of becoming someone they never saw coming. I think about what it actually took to get there. Not the money, not the LLC, not the real estate, but the interior work. The decision, made early and kept every single day, to be honest. Not to perform honesty, not to announce it, but to actually build my life on things that were true. I paid every loan on time. I filed every tax return correctly. I built Aldervale on clean paperwork and real numbers. When Sandra reviewed my documents, there was nothing to hide because I hadn't hidden anything that mattered. That's not luck. That's a choice you make before anything is at stake, so that when everything is at stake, the foundation holds. People talk about intelligence like it's a fixed thing you either have or don't. I don't think that's right. What I had was curiosity that I kept feeding when nobody was encouraging me to feed it: index funds at 23, financial statements at 25, tax structures at 27, real estate law at 30. None of it was handed to me. None of it was obvious. I made mistakes and I corrected them, and I kept going. The ability to look clearly at a situation, including a painful family situation, and see it for what it actually is, not what you wish it were, that's something you build. I did into the same way I built everything else, slowly, without an audience, one correct decision at a time. And then there's the part that doesn't get enough credit: the staying power. The years of going home for holidays and eating dinner at that table and driving back to my apartment in the dark, and not collapsing, not lashing out, not giving them the version of me that would have been so easy to become. The angry one. The bitter one. The one who blows everything up just to feel something. I stayed quiet not because I was weak, but because I was waiting for the moment when quiet would become its own kind of power. Most people don't wait that long. I understand why. It's exhausting. But what's on the other side of it? The version of yourself who moved through all of that and came out with her integrity intact? That's worth the wait. Jess and I are not close. Maybe we never will be. But her daughter, Rin, fell asleep in my arms at Thanksgiving, and the house was warm, and I drove home without needing anything from anyone. That's not a small thing. That took everything I had to build. Whatever it cost, I'd pay it again.